Making terrariums can get really expensive. Glass tanks alone can cost hundreds of pounds, and don't even get me started on overpriced hardscape materials. For beginners, it can feel completely overwhelming, so that's why I'll be building a terrarium without spending a single penny, and that means everything has to come from outdoors. The only things I'm allowed to use are my car and basic tools like plastic bags and tubs to collect and carry stuff. There's 8 steps I'll need to follow to complete the terrarium, including adding life at the end, but for step 1 I'll need to source a container. To find a free tank, I had a few ideas. I thought about using an old jar, which is a great way to recycle spare glass and perfect if you're just starting out, but I wanted to go bigger, and technically that jar was already in my house, so it didn't really count for the challenge. I started hunting around Facebook Marketplace for used tanks and also put the word out to my friends that I was looking for an old fish tank. And then by chance, one of them messaged me. Yo, Ben, you got a spare fish tank?
Yeah.
Once he dropped it off, I gave it a clean, and just like that, we had our tank. And now we can move on to step 2, the drainage layer. I need to get everything else I'll use from outside, so I packed some stuff and headed down to the woods. Okay, so the first thing we need to find is rocks for the drainage layer, and to be honest, some of these rocks in this car park are gonna be perfect. While you watch me pick up the rocks, let me tell you about the purpose of the drainage layer. When you water a terrarium, some excess water will always drain to the bottom of the substrate. If you don't have a drainage layer, the water will sit in the substrate, causing it to be too soggy. This can lead to issues in your plant, such as root rot. Let's go and whack the rocks in the tank. After spreading them out, I realised that I didn't quite have enough, so I supplemented with some other rounder stones that I found in a river while in Scotland. It may seem like a mild waste of these, but I didn't want to go back to get more, and I still got them for free. The main downside to using rocks like these is that they're super heavy, and I'd normally use something like Leca that's light and will hold more water. Let's move on to step 3, the substrate barrier. Okay, so the next thing we need to find is the substrate barrier, and for this I think I'm going to be using moss. This moss resting on the surface here is going to be perfect as it's somewhat dry and laid out in sheets. The purpose of the substrate barrier is to stop substrate from falling down into the drainage layer. If it weren't in place, the substrate would surround the stones and it would be soggy at the bottom. Let's get it into the tank. I would normally use window screen mesh for the substrate barrier, but this is the next best free option I could think of, as the moss will still allow water to pass through while also preventing substrate from falling in. Now for step 4, we'll be collecting the substrate itself. The next component we'll need for the terrarium is going to be the substrate, and for this we'll be using 3 things. The first of these things is the loamy material found underneath leaf litter. It's packed with bits of twig and other debris, helping with drainage, and it also has lots of microfauna inside, such as springtails, which will be super beneficial to the terrarium. I'll also mix in some leaf litter to further break up the soil and provide something for the microfauna to break down. The last thing I'll add is some extra bits of moss. I then shook around the bag to mix the substrate and brought it back to the tank. When adding the substrate in, I'm sloping it towards the back of the terrarium. This gradient will make it easier to see what's at the back when looking at the terrarium face on, and will also add a lot more depth to the build. We can now move on to step 5, the hardscape. I'd recommend looking for wooden hardscape along the edge of shingle beaches or along the edge of lakes. The driftwood you find here is often shaped by the water and will have dried out on the shore by the sun, making it perfect for use in terrariums. For rocks, you can really find them anywhere, and just collect anything that inspires you, or that you think looks good. Here's a bunch of driftwood I collected recently, and this is what I'll be using in the free terrarium build. I'm deciding not to use any rocks in this tank, and these branches will make up the bulk of the hardscape. I wanted to create the effect of a large tree stump on a forest floor. It's worth playing around with your hardscape until you find something you definitely think will work, as it's hard to change this later on in the build. I'm adding some extra substrate on the left side here to help blend the wood into the floor, and then I also brush the excess substrate off of the wood. Finally, we can now start to get this terrarium planted. The next component of the terrarium that we'll need is going to be the plants, and for this, we'll predominantly be using moss. Moss is by far the best readily available plant for terrariums. You can find it pretty much anywhere where there's moisture, in urban areas on walls, in forests, or in cracks in the path. Moss also thrives in terrarium conditions and enjoys the added humidity. Another plant we'll be using is English ivy, which also does really well in the humid conditions present in a terrarium, due to it being found in similar areas to moss. I also picked up these saplings from an ash tree and a pine tree, which I'll attempt to bonsai. Whether they'll survive or not, I'm not sure, but I'll give it a go. I was all finished up in the woods, so I headed on home to start the planting. I'll start by covering all of the exposed substrate with the moss that I collected. This really helps with the alive forest floor feel, and I'll usually add moss wherever I can fit it in the scape. I'll add in the ash sapling behind the middle piece of driftwood, pressing the roots down into the substrate. The pine sapling can go alongside it to fill out some of the background. I'll start adding moss in between the driftwoods to blend the different pieces together. Now I can start to work the ivy into the driftwood and moss. These orangey twigs that I picked up in the forest will also help add some different colour to fill out the back. I'm also adding this pine cone to fill in this gap and match the pine tree. We can now move on to step 7, the water. To get water for free, I'll be taking it from my water butt. This is a barrel in my garden that stores rainwater. It works by collecting water that runs off my greenhouse and using a hose to move it into the barrel. Rainwater actually isn't a bad choice here and is much better than using tap water. This is because tap water contains many unwanted chemicals that could contaminate the terrarium and harm the plants. Make sure to not overwater when spraying down a terrarium. If you want to know the exact amount to add, it's hard to say as it will vary between terrarium, but you don't want the soil to end up soggy. Remember, you can always add in more water, but it's hard to remove it again. It's now time for the final step, adding in some life. For this, we're going to look for some native isopods which can normally be found hiding underneath objects. This guy here is rolled up into a ball to protect himself. Isopods will make a great fit in this terrarium as they will feed on decaying leaf litter in the substrate and have plenty of space to crawl around. I'll tip them in and the terrarium is now complete. I'm super happy with how this terrarium turned out, and I'm excited to see how it evolves as everything settles in. I hope this has crushed any doubts in your mind that terrarium making doesn't have to be expensive if you work with the plants around you. If you enjoyed this video, click on this one next where I create a mini waterfall palletarium.